Hey everyone, Aaron here from MTGChallengers, and welcome to another Magic the Gathering deck tech. Today I'll be discussing our Dimir or blue-black control deck for Fate Reforged Standard. This is perhaps the deck that got the most support from the new set. We got removal, counter spells, and a couple new win conditions, so the deck has gotten just significantly better, and I think it has the potential to dominate the meta as the premier control deck in Standard. So let's get started by discussing the creatures, of which there are only two. First off, I have a new card, Silumgar the Drifting Death, as a one-of. I think this card is amazing and has huge potential. It's basically blue-black control's way to just kill blue-white control. They use Elspeth as their main win condition, and in pretty much every way, this just defeats that card. 3 power doesn't look that great, but that's just the number it needs to dodge her -3 ability, and every time you swing in, all of the tokens will die, so you can hit her for 3 and kill all the tokens in one swing, which is fantastic. Beyond that, it will kill any little aggressive creatures if you aren't drawing removal, and hexproof makes it practically impossible to deal with once it's resolved. It also works incredibly well with another new card, Crux of Fate, which we'll get to in a minute. And the other creature I have here in the deck is a single Pearl Lake Ancient. Another fantastic win condition. You can flash it in response to an attack or just at the end of their turn. Great against other control decks, of course, since they can't counter it. And with all the non-creature spells this deck has, you can pretty easily pump it way up. And it almost has hexproof in that you can respond to any kind of removal spell or board wipe by returning 3 lands to your hand, which in the late game isn't actually that bad. In fact, it can actually work in your favor by returning Temples of Deceit, so you can replay them and scry again, and also Dismal Backwaters to be able to gain some more life. So now we move on to all of the spells, which are the bulk of a control deck, of course. A playset of Thoughtseize is amazing for some disruption. We run a lot of basic swamps in this deck, so we usually have a black source on turn 1 that won't cost any life, which is nice, especially up against the aggressive decks. The card itself should be pretty self-explanatory. You play it and take the best card they have. It's also a good way to check control and burn decks for counter spells or other shenanigans to be sure the coast is clear before you try to resolve a win condition or a board wipe. Next up, we have 2 Disdainful Stroke for some counter magic. A really fantastic spell, just counters so much stuff in this format right now. Against Abzan, it gets their Siege Rhinos, it gets Butcher of the Horde against Mardu, and it gets Whip of Erebos, Sidisi, and Tassiger up against the reanimation decks. Obviously, up against the aggressive decks, you'll want to side it out, but having 2 in the main usually works out really well. 2 Bile Blight also works well for some blowout removal. Like Disdainful Stroke, it's pretty conditional, but when it works, it really works. It's another way to kill blue-white control since it deals with Elspeth tokens very well, and it's also very good against Jeskai tokens to deal with their Hordling outbursts, Raise the Alarms, and Monastery Mentor tokens. Then we have Ashiok Nightmare Weaver as a 3-of. Great early game planeswalker to mill away their win conditions, or to mill out the control decks in the late game as a win condition on its own. It's particularly good because the cards are exiled rather than put in the graveyard, so they can't use them to delve. He gets up in the loyalty really quickly, and his minus ability can be a win condition to gain control of all the big creatures running around in the format right now. Next, we have a playset of Hero's Downfall. Amazing removal spell, great in just about every situation, no restrictions on power, toughness, anything like that, and it's at instant speed, so it's just about the best all-around removal spell in the format. And being able to kill planeswalkers just pushes it way over the top to get rid of Elspeth, Sorens, Ajani's, and the new Ugin Spirit Dragon. For some more counter magic, we have 4 Dissolve. It's like what Hero's Downfall is to Bile Blight, a much less circumstantial and more inclusive spell to deal with just about anything your opponent may have. And getting to scry 1 after you counter their win condition makes it a great tempo spell to get you 1 card closer to that Pearl Lake Ancient, Ugin, or whatever else you need to close the game out. Then we have possibly the most valuable addition from the new set, Crux of Fate. Control always needs a board wipe, so we have a playset of it. Should be pretty self-explanatory. You play it to clear their board out as soon as they overextend. The one thing that really pushes it above a standard board wipe is the ability to choose dragons or non-dragons. It's a really powerful choice since, like I mentioned before, we run Silumgar, who is a dragon, so if you play him, you can drop this with no worries because he's a dragon, so you can just name non-dragon creatures and have a one-sided board wipe. For some card advantage, we have a playset of Jace's Ingenuity. Again, it's a pretty self-explanatory card. You do it at the end of your opponent's turn to get ahead of them in cards, which usually wins you the game in the long run. You can also do it when they have a spell on the stack, so while they're attempting to resolve that win condition, you can Jace's Ingenuity in response and hopefully draw into a Dissolve or Disdainful Stroke to counter it. Then we have another new card, Ugin the Spirit Dragon, as a 1-of. Absolutely amazing control card. Typically, you drop it in the late game and just wipe out their entire board. Creatures, other planeswalkers, enchantments, and then you just -2 them over and over until they're at 0. And that ultimate is just crazy good and surprisingly accessible since he begins with 7 +7 loyalty and has a +2. Resolving him usually just wins you the game. And to round out things with the spells, I have a playset of Dig Through Time. Great card for controlled. The card advantage and deck advantage you get from this card is just crazy. Like the Ingenuity, you do it at the end of their turn or with a spell of theirs on the stack. You dig really deep into your deck, so you'll get what you want more than not, and with all the non-creature spells we have, the Delve works out really well. And you not even having to reveal the cards to your opponent just makes it all the better. So that's it for the spells. Let's take a look at the mana base for this deck. First off, I have a playset of Polluted Delta. Fetch lands are always awesome, and we have plenty of basics to search up. You usually wait to use it until they have something on the stack or moving to their attack phase or something, so you can respond by cracking it, getting whatever you need, and countering it with whatever you have, or killing it with Hero's Downfall or something like that. Then I have 4 Temple of Deceit. It's a dual source, which is important in any 2-color competitive deck. And getting to Scry is particularly valuable for a control deck to send excess lands and other things to the bottom and keep drawing answers. And the other dual source I have is Dismal Backwater as a playset. Gaining life isn't as good as a Scry, but a little bit can go a long way against the aggressive decks. Next, I have a single Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. Having absolute fixing for one of the deck's 2 colors is really fantastic, and it makes your fetch lands able to tap for mana on their own, which can be really nice. And then I have my basics, which consist of 10 swamps and 3 islands, for a grand total of 26 lands. Control typically plays plenty of lands to be able to respond to whatever your opponent plays, and this one is no exception. So that's it for the main board. Let's take a look at the sideboard. First off, I have an additional 2 copies of Disdainful Stroke. Again, it's a circumstantial spell, and having copies 3 and 4 on the side makes it possible to have a full playset in games 2 and 3, which can greatly help you in winning the entire match. 2 Negate gives me some more counter magic. Great up against control and the mid-range decks with more planeswalkers and fewer creatures. It'll counter any dissolve or whatever control is trying to do to ruin your plans, and the mid-range decks will have trouble resolving their Elspeths, Sorens, and Ajanis. And to round out the counter magic, we have Neutralizing Blast as a 2 of. There's so much multicolored stuff in the format right now. Gets rid of the Fleecemane Lions, Siege Rhinos, Siddices, Butchers of the Horde, and of course all of the multicolored planeswalkers. Then I have 2 copies of Reality Shift, a very rare effect for blue to have, and it works well up against the mid-range decks, where giving them a free 2/2 is a much better situation than letting their big win condition beat us to death. I also have another 2 Bile Blight in the side. Much like the Disdainful Stroke, it's here to give us more of the card in the matchups where it's a blowout. 4 Drown in Sorrow gives us a more situational board wipe for less mana. It's best up against the mono red and mono black aggro decks with all of their 1 and 2 toughness creatures. You wipe out their board presence and get a scry trigger all for 3 mana. And finally, we have a single Liliana Vess. Very good in pretty much every matchup. Making them discard a card is almost never a bad thing, but it really shines against the aggressive burn decks, where they need pretty much every burn spell they can to get you to 0 life, and any disruption can really ruin their chances. The tutor ability is also fantastic to search up our single Ugin, Silumgar, or Pearl Lake Ancient to close the game out. So that's it for this deck tech. Be sure to check out our others. To see these decks in action, check out our gameplay videos. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the Facebook page and consider making a donation to support the continuation of this project. Thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe for more Magic the Gathering content.